Chapter 7 of Sinister House by Leland Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ben Tucker. Chapter 7. Thoroughly ashamed, too. That's the word. Books which teach etiquette of the drawing room had better put in a special clause to warn students against behaving before their hosts as if they were seeing the hideous family specter pass along the wall of the dwellings in which they are being entertained. My behavior could hardly have been courteous, and a look I caught in Giles's eye once or twice made me fairly cringe with shame. I dared not look at Julia. Not once during supper did I catch her eye. As for Eric, he was quiet, but no more so than usual, yet I think his smiles were only a subdued reflection of Julia's excessive merriment. Giles was, of course, the life of the table, life with a good deal of stinging snap in it. If only I could have consoled myself with conviction that there was an undercurrent of something mysterious. But I assure you there was not the slightest sign of such a thing. Annette thought I wasn't very well, that's all. My sudden understandings and my horrid vision. I might as well have had a stomachache. Just the same, deep down in my heart, or stomach, if you will, I knew I had not been dreaming, and also that I had suffered from no ordinary ill turn. My weird experience was, I knew, overlaid with my usual habits of thought and expression. I had been the first to deny them, too. Yet that experience had startled into shivering sensitiveness an unfamiliar nerve within me, one of which I had not learned control. Thanks to my own rational way of living and to the conduct of those about me at table, the thrill of it was subsiding. But it had been laid bare. It had been awakened. It was tuned to respond to the slightest vibrations. And it was not to leave me long in quiet. On the wall of the dining room opposite me there hung a long, rich curtain. I think I knew there was a door behind it, though how I knew I cannot say. At any rate, I am not by nature inquisitive, and I have never wondered into what passage, closet, or room it gave access. I found during supper that if I looked at that curtain the new nerve trembled within me. This was inexplicable. There was little enough design on the cloth, no shape I could recognize, faded, heavy gold embroidery that stood out only faintly from the deep blue velvet. Yet I found I could not look at that curtain for long without beginning to shiver inside. Mind you, I was crushed enough. I controlled myself. I did not tell anybody what I felt. Heaven forbid. I didn't even let anyone catch me looking at it. But once or twice I caught Eric looking very sharply at it, and very intently, as if he were trying to place a noise that came from behind it. That made me feel queer, too. Now, when we rose from the table, Eric went straight to that curtain. I began to shudder, as with an ague. Bobby began to whimper, though he had been well behaved throughout the meal. Eric drew the curtain a little to one side. I saw the doorknob, and I saw Eric put his hand on it and turn it. He bent his head to the panel of the door as if listening. He pushed the door gently, but it did not open. Suddenly, like a flash, Julia rushed up to him, put her small hand over his on the knob, and laughing but quite pale, said, "Now, my dear, remember what you promised me about that room." She couldn't have moved his hand from the knob, however. Was it because of that she began backing slowly from him? Was it because of that her face took on the haggard look I had seen on it before? For my own part, I began to feel cold again, and in spite of all my efforts to control myself, I shivered so that my teeth chattered. I could have jumped at Eric and thrown him from that door. At that moment, Giles caught sight of Eric. "Where does that door lead to, Greer?" he called out, going over to stand beside him. "I've often been curious about it." Julia stamped her foot and gave a shrill laugh. "I will not have you men fooling round that horrid place," she said. And then she told us that the shape of the room was so ugly that she could not bear it, that from the first she had made up her mind never to have it opened, that she had thrown a lot of their useless and broken-down furniture into it, and locked it up. "It hasn't been cleaned for ages," she said to Giles, "and you would hate it as much as I do." Then to Eric, "Why do you think of opening that place tonight, dear? Let us all go into the other room and have our coffee." "Well," said Eric, "I thought I heard something in there." It was a great relief to me to see him take his hand from the knob. Yet, in spite of my own sensations, I couldn't help wondering why he should grant Julia's request with such reluctance. For he was reluctant. He let go the knob very slowly, and even after he had done so, he still held the curtain from the door, and stood looking very hard at the panels. "Why," said Julia, "it's probably a squirrel. He won't do any harm in there. Let him run around a bit. Come away now into the front room, all of you." She was actually trying to coax him. Never before had I seen him tarry an instant to grant the least of her requests. He turned to Giles and said to him with a laugh that had a note of grimness in it, "Well, I can't get into it anyhow, so we might as well go on." Then it came out, Julia snatching the story from her husband's lips and laughing over it, that she had not found a bolt on this side of the door safeguard enough against someone's opening it, perhaps quite innocently, and she had sent to New York for a locksmith to come and set a Yale lock on it. "And she promptly mislaid the key," Eric concluded. All this was in itself innocent enough, but that new nerve of mine wouldn't cease shivering until they had all stepped away from the door, and then I almost jumped a foot into the air when Giles roared out the name of Bluebeard. There's another fearful story for you. Of course we had told it to Bobby many times. He was familiar with all the details of it. I thanked my stars that Annette had already made off with him down the corridor towards the living room. Julia darted ahead of us men and joined my wife. We followed them down the narrow, rosy way. Eric was half smiling again, but there wasn't much light in his face. I remember he told Giles as we went along that the only irrational thing he had ever discovered in Julia was her attitude towards that room. Against it, she had taken a sudden and inflexible aversion, for which he could conceive of no reason. It wasn't a hideous room, and it gave on the river, too, but she had even exacted from him a promise never to open the door of it while she was in the house. When we were all in the living room, Giles began to tease Julia a little bit about such things as forbidden rooms. Julia was very smart and quick with him, and Giles was splendid at raillery. While they were at it, I slipped out quietly into the hall, took a big candle, and went out to put a patch into the blown-out shoe of my Ford. I made no noise, for I did not wish to interrupt the others. The front door closed behind me without a sound, and I was greatly relieved to be alone, even in the dark night. I was glad there was the patchwork to be done. There's nothing like a familiar, unpleasant job to keep the mind from brooding. The little light from the candle I carried went with me through the black archway of hemlocks like a warm, though feeble, friend. I laughed to hear myself talk to it when I set it down on the running board of the car. I did my work carefully and well. I put my mind wholly on it. I knew just what I was up against, and that was a comfort. Yet I couldn't have been myself, because when, just as I was making ready to pump up the mended tire, I thought I heard the sound of footsteps coming up from under the hemlocks. The cold sweat broke out all over me. I listened and strained my eyes. For $100 I could not have picked up the candle and walked to the place where I fancied the sound had come. I just stood still, thoroughly scared. In a moment or two I heard the same sound again. It's a wonder to me I didn't turn and run. Something white was moving up towards me from the driveway. The sight of it took all power of motion from my legs. It took the strength from under my stomach, and that organ felt as if it had dropped a foot inside me. When the thing came nearer, and I recognized Julia, I could not speak for the huskiness in my throat. There I stood beside the Ford in my shirt-sleeves, the pump dangling from one hand, and there she stood beside me, in her white evening dress, and the only light in all the world to shine on us two was from the candle on the running board. "Pierre," she said, without waiting for me to speak, "do you think I'm crazy?" I tried to call her name, but a queer noise came out of my restricted throat. "Do you think I'm crazy?" she repeated. "What a question," I said at last. We were both hardly more than whispering. "Never mind. Do you? Answer me, for heaven's sake." "Of course not, Julia dear." "Good," she said. Then she came very close to me and whispered, "Neither do I think you are. I know you saw something in my house tonight." She took my sleeve and looked up at me, but her face was not more than a deep shadow. I was afraid her skirt would catch fire. It was very near the candle flame. I bent down and moved the candle, and our shadows, vague and enormous on the mass of foliage behind us, made a gigantic swing. "Tell me," she went on, still whispering, "how many did you see?" "One," I answered, feeling, I don't know why, shamefaced. "I thought so. The woman?" "Yes." I began to be calmed by her matter-of-factness. While I could not but feel she was highly wrought, her voice, her manner, and her quiet actions assured me that she faced whatever the situation was without dismay. It was a business to make the heart sick, but In the certainty that it existed, I found something soothing. After a moment or two of silence, I asked, "Is there more than one?" "Two," she answered. "An old man besides. He isn't so vile, but he makes it all the harder for me. She comes first. He comes later. She shan't do it alone, ever." "Do what, Julia, alone?" I asked, the words catching in my throat and almost strangling me. "Kill me," Julia replied quietly. I thought she might be going to faint. Her voice was so low, but I had better have worried about myself. It was I who was nearest quaking. My blood was like ice water in my veins. I longed to run with her back to the warm house, haunted though I believed it to be. To sit near a warm fire, to escape from our cold loneliness and our soundless, grotesque, vast black shadows. But when she next spoke, her words stiffened me with the thought that ever again to escape from this horror must be at the price of quitting her. "They have nearly done for me," she said. "You have come in the nick of time." "For God's sake, then," I cried out, "leave this dreadful house." "It is not the house, Pierre." I don't know what I was thinking of. I had perhaps no connected thoughts, and no suspicion. I just spoke. I just said, "Eric." "Eric," Julia repeated after me, and I felt as if my mind had been split from my body. So instantly did a million terrible and vague thoughts spring up and multiply in it. Julia was shivering against me, and I said, "You're cold." Then I put my coat round her. For 10 minutes she talked to me, not rapidly and consecutively, but in sentences, or even fragments of sentences, some of which were like sparks to the tinder of my imagination, while others left me still in the dark. Julia was proud and high-spirited. It was not easy for her to ask help of me in her more than distressful situation. I think, however, she wanted me to understand. She needed, let us say, my comradeship in what might lie ahead of her. As to her own conduct up to the present, that, I could see, had been governed by her entire and unquestioning love of Eric, which was also the source of that strength of hers, more valiant and enduring than I or anyone else can appreciate. For instance, she and her husband had not been settled in the house a week before she acknowledged to herself that there was an influence in the place, not natural and not good, which was trying to alienate her from her husband's companionship. It was insidious, but it was real. She had had even a vague suspicion that the evil something emanated from Eric, but this was so intolerable that by sheer force of will she banished it utterly from her mind. She faced the possibility that the house was haunted. This was, she thought at the time, a grotesque and an unsubstantiated fear. She fancied she felt things, that was all. She had bad dreams. She was in danger of letting her imagination run away with her. Up to the time that Eric first went away, she could not say that she had really seen anything. Just once or twice the outline, perhaps, of a woman. No body, no substance. But this had appeared in the middle of the night while Eric slept peacefully at her side. She held as evidence against the soundness of her own mind. The feebly restraining touch of cold fingertips on her face when she turned towards her husband, she took as a symptom of slightly disordered circulation. Never then had she thought of telling Eric. She should have been ashamed, for one thing, after urging him to take that particular house. Then, too, something was vile. She should have suffered almost anything rather than let Eric even hear of it. I knew, we all knew, that Eric was to be protected, and I used to think that he was protecting her. When Eric went away the first time, she meant to stay alone in that house and defeat whatever haunted it. She had already begun to suspect that the secret ghost of evil had decoyed her into it in the first place. Decoyed was Annette's word, I remembered. She was not then afraid. But the ghost had left her alone. During the time of his absence, she had not once felt the pressure of the evil thing, only when Eric came back. The thought of this unnerved her somewhat. She apprehended that what she said might make me think evil of Eric, whereas there was nothing evil in Eric. He was entirely without blame. He was entirely innocent. One of the most terrible things she had had to bear was his misunderstanding of her behavior. She had had to protect herself against violent onslaught. The thing that had been most vicious when she tried to approach her husband had been violent, too, when her husband approached her. She had to acknowledge she had become afraid, that the nearness of her husband was becoming more and more dreadful to her. She had fought with all her strength to keep beside him, to preserve their intimacy. She couldn't explain to Eric. It was all unbelievable. She could substantiate nothing. Eric saw nothing. The greater the effort she made to draw near him, on the other hand, the more that malevolent thing became incandescent. She was terrified by the visible appearance. She was losing her strength. Eric was in an anguish of mind. He said little, but she knew that he could explain her conduct only one way. He thought that she was losing her love for him, that he was unpleasant to her, and she could do nothing but protest in words. Her will to act, her insatiable desire to act, aborted through fear. She simply was powerless to explain to Eric. There was something so loathsome in the malice of that fiend that she could not speak of it to Eric, whose ultra-sensitive nature would have been sickened and revolted beyond endurance. Once she had tried. I knew the name. She had heard it too. Yes, once she had mentioned it to Eric. The effect upon him was indescribable. She would not speak of it to him again. No, she would not leave the house. It was plain to her that the house was not infected. The source of the evil was in... She couldn't utter that, but I guessed what she had in mind. Undoubtedly, the evil was, for some unknown and unimaginable reason, strongest in that house. But what avail to go elsewhere with Eric? The secret ghost would follow him. Did I not remember Annette had said that Eric had brought nightmares to my son? There would be nightmares everywhere for Julia. If the horror were to be utterly routed, then it must be overcome in its stronghold. "What," she cried out in torment, "has the spectre to do with Eric, and what has Eric to do with this house?" She made a movement of despair with her arms, grotesquely and furtively imitated by the huge black shadows on the foliage of the hemlocks. "I believe, Julia," I replied, trying to speak calmly, "that Eric is the final object of its malevolence, that Eric is the marked victim. I believe that it is pursuing the only course that can end in mortal torture to him." "I know it," she said with a sob. "Me principally, but everyone who loves him. He has so few friends, only you." She took me by the arm and leaned close to whisper in my ear. "Children, they all used to love Eric. I am insane with fear for them. You must not bring Bobby to the house again." I shuddered. In a moment's revulsion of feeling, I swore to myself I would see Eric dead on the granolithic walk to my house rather than let him cross the threshold again. What terrible knowledge and experience had not these few weeks brought to Julia and to me? Great heavens, there was the hellish mockery of our furtive black shadows, a devilish, soundless, lightless burlesque of our gestures before the candle. But what a reality in our fear and despair! The feeble, restraining drawing of clammy fingers over Julia's cheek had become the clutch of cold ghost hands at her throat. They had been at my boy, those hands, and the suspicion of the source of that evil, once banished, intolerable to the mind, had become... "Eric must speak," I called out. Julia laid her hand over my mouth that blasphemed the man who, in spite of all she had undergone, remained to her dearest of all things upon the earth. "Don't," she whispered. "Oh, don't. Perhaps something in his life. You don't know him as I know him. Too terrible for... I cannot dig him open like a grave. We cannot rifle him. Say nothing to Eric. In due time. He is great-souled. In due time. His time." There was an end to our talk. We started back to the house, but I had the tire still to pump. I begged her to go on without me, for the wind was cold and she was most thinly clad, but she insisted upon standing by while I pumped. The exercise brought up my spirits a little. I asked her to try a hand, not wholly jokingly, but knowing the exercise would warm her as it had warmed me, yet she hardly heard me. She did not speak again until we went together up the steps to the front door, and then it was to implore me to respect Eric's dumb grief. We entered the rose-colored hallway. Before we reached the door to the living room, Eric had come out to meet us. He looked anxiously at Julia. "My dearest girl," he said reproachfully. "Out of doors this cold night without a wrap?"
"Never mind, Eric dear. I have been helping Pierre mend the tire."
She went gaily into the living room, and I, rubbing my hands, Eric's touch affectionately upon my shoulder, followed her. It was late, and when Annette saw me come in, she immediately stood up and prepared to go home. Julia would have had us all stay. She wanted company. Giles, too, feeling, I dare say, that he had been cheated of Julia's society, was all for settling down into another hour's talk. But Annette was right. She's always right. We had to go on, for Bobby's sake, if for nothing else. "All right, dear," I called out cheerfully, and for a second I could not believe that the cheerful voice and the homely words were my own. I had been out in another world. So we left Julia alone with her husband. What else we left with her, only I could imagine. And I carried into our living room that night for the first time a worry that, as I took my easy chair, grew heavier, not lighter. Annette betook herself at once upstairs with Bobby. Giles began walking up and down, his chin in his hand. Automatically I filled my pipe, and I didn't know whether I was an idiot, a good fellow, or a conspirator. I'd left behind me more than a vivid picture. I'd left a shocking reality. I'd left a delicate, charming woman, defenseless against powers bent on doing her mischief, perhaps the one irremediable mischief that very night. You will understand that I was unpleasantly nervous. Well, just as if nothing had happened, Annette came down, lit the fire on the hearth for us, and brought in some beer from the kitchen. Then she sat down and said quite calmly, "I will never take my boy into that dreadful house again."
"Huh?"
Giles grunted scornfully.
"Are you crazy too?"
"No," I said emphatically. "She isn't. She's perfectly right." But Giles went on as if I had said nothing.
"That boy of yours should be spanked for behaving as he did. A good whipping now and then would take such nonsense out of him."
So that was all it meant to Giles, a fit of unruly temper and a spoiled child. I started to give him a call down. "Giles, you think you're darn smart." That word tripped me up.
"Well, go on. What have you got to say?"
"Nothing."
"Out with it."
Annette looked at me anxiously. Once or twice already she had laid her hand on my forehead to find if I had a fever. She could see that I wasn't myself. She tried to change the drift of our talk.
"I don't think," she said, "that Robert is the only one who was rude there tonight. It was hardly courteous of Julia to run off and leave me alone as she did, and after her urging me to stay, too."
"Don't, Annette," I cried. "For heaven's sake, don't." I got up and paced the room a couple of times, and I guess Annette didn't know what to make of me. Finally, sitting down again, I said to Giles as calmly and impressively as I could, "That house is haunted." He merely laughed loudly and called me a poor simpleton. "And," I added, "the ghosts that haunt it are trying to murder Julia Greer." That at last impressed him, but not as I had thought it would do. His face became hard, and fixing me with his eyes, he said in a cynical tone the one word, "Ghosts." He put a world of meaning into his tone. "It was not ghosts in that house that were hurting Julia." The fear that I might have betrayed Eric made me lightheaded. I loved that man, and pitied him. "Ghosts," I affirmed.
"Who are they?"
"Tonight," I said, "I heard the name Snart." At that, Annette leaned forward and whispered,
"Not really?" "So," cried Giles in a flash, "you've heard that unsavory name before." "A man named Morgan Snart built the house," Annette explained with a troubled look at me. "Good," said Giles. "I've tried to find out from Greer who built that house. He is not the man to ask. Morgan Snart. I mustn't forget that."
He took a little book from his pocket and wrote the name down in it, talking to me sarcastically all the time.
"And of course he was insane, this Morgan Snart. A murderer, a suicide or something. It's only such unfortunates that come back to earth, isn't it, Pierre? Nothing else would do."
He scribbled away. "I don't know anything about him," I grumbled, "except that he's dead."
"Yes, of course, dead, too. That's the perfect idea of a ghost, isn't it, Pierre?"
And then closing the little book with a slap, he said cuttingly,
"I tell you, my idea of a ghost is something quite different. Dead men rise up never. Read even your poets. Ghosts breed in the living. That's where we'll catch them."
He stood up and started for the little room under the stair, looking at his watch. "What are you going to do, Giles?" I asked.
"It's only 11. I'm going to telephone to a friend of mine in New York, a lawyer. I don't suppose your ghosts ever walk much before midnight, do they? Maybe we'll lay this one before the witching hour strikes."
I sprang up. "For the love of Mike, Giles," I cried, "stop this damn mockery. You think I'm nuts, all right? But I tell you there's a woman in that rotten old house that—"
"I have entire confidence in Julia," he said coolly. "She is a rational and an invincible woman."
"You're sure of that, are you?" I asked, equally calm.
"Perfectly."
"Well, then, Julia may have something to say that will change your opinions."
"I shall have something to say," he answered scornfully, "that will change yours."
End of chapter 7.